Ajnanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Takshur Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin iti namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatade Satarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Jai Sri Prabhupada Ki. It is my great pleasure and my great fortune also to be part of this. I would describe it as a monumental event organized by the team assisting our Dr. Gajendra Panda, for which I thank him immensely. It is most befitting to end what we have all experienced in the year 2021 as a very turbulent year. And what better way to end the year and to begin a new year than to be hearing from such a transcendental literature as Bhagavad Gita. Being from outside the Vedic culture, being born in Canada, it took me in this lifetime 25 years before even hearing the name Krishna. When I first came in contact with the Bhagavad Gita, that is all, of course, by the mercy of my Guru Maharaj, the divine grace of Prabhupada. And Bhagavad Gita continues, not only for myself, but for so many others who have come in contact with these teachings, especially outside of India, as a guiding light. And we have come to know as well how Bhagavad Gita is the treasure house of knowledge that goes beyond all boundaries, that goes beyond all faiths, all religions for that matter. It is the book of knowledge, the preliminary book of knowledge for all persons in the material world, especially those in leadership position. So I'm very thankful to get this opportunity. I was very happy to hear the presentation given by His Grace Ajitananda Prabhu on the 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. Many of the points that he has made, I had also naturally noted down, so I will avoid to repeat, although it will be difficult. So with your kind permission, what I have done is I have divided this chapter in various sections, and I've chosen a few key verses that I would like to comment upon. And by the end of my presentation, I would like to link or connect some of these important teachings of this 14th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, entitled The Three Modes of Material Nature, to various aspects that I'll elaborate upon a little bit later in my presentation. I would like to recite a few of these verses with your kind permission in Sanskrit, and then provide some short comments to see how we can derive some inspiration from these important teachings of Lord Krishna. The chapter, as we have heard, covers 27 verses, out of which Lord Krishna speaks 26. Arjuna is only asking one question at the very end of the chapter. We will come to that later on. So I will begin. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Mukham karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim. Yat kripa tamaham bande Sri Gurum Dinataranam. So chapter 14 begins with the first verse. Sri Bhagavan Uvacha Param Bhuya Pravakshyami Jnananam Jnanamuttamam Yajgyatva Munaya Sarve Param Siddhim Itogataha. Although we know that in previous chapters, Lord Krishna has spoken about Jnanam, knowledge. We can recall in the 9th chapter, especially, Krishna in the 2nd verse of the 9th chapter speaks to Arjuna how this knowledge that he is explaining or giving to him, it is Rajavidya. Rajavidya, Rajaguyam, most confidential knowledge. Rajavidya, Rajaguyam, Pavitram, Idam, Uttamam, topmost knowledge. However, we see how this topmost knowledge, Krishna continues to expand upon this knowledge. Jnananam, Jnanam, Uttamam. The most sublime knowledge is being referred to here. And Krishna also explains how by knowing this knowledge, by cultivating this knowledge, great sages in the past who have cultivated this same knowledge have attained this Param Siddhim. What is this Param Siddhim? This will be explained, of course, later on in the chapter. Therefore, the translation, again I shall declare to you, O Arjuna, this supreme wisdom, the best of all knowledge, knowing which all the sages have attained the supreme perfection. Second verse is also equally important. Idam jnanam upasritya mama sadharmyam agataha sagepi nupajayante pralayena vyatanti cha. Krishna is explaining here to Arjuna that by becoming fixed in this knowledge, one can actually attain the same transcendental position. He is not telling that one becomes exactly like me or that one becomes myself. He is explaining that one attains a transcendental position. Krishna is described in the Shastra. Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachit Ananda Vigraha Anadir Adir Govinda Sarva Karana Karanam. So these three qualities of Sachit Ananda, Sat, eternal, Chit, full of knowledge, Ananda, full of happiness. is also something that the living entity can again regain or realize. And this, of course, is the message of this 14th chapter, as was nicely explained by our previous speaker, Ajitananda Prabhu. Actually, the majority of the verses in this chapter explain the various symptoms of those who are in the modes of goodness. And we can easily, simply by reading those verses, we can easily understand that none of those positions, whether I am in Sattvagun or Tamagun or Rajagun, regardless of which modes of material nature, I am still conditioned. That even I may be situated in the mode of goodness, I can be overcome by the influence of the lower modes of nature. Of course, Krishna also explains that of all of these three modes, naturally, the mode of goodness, and this is in text number 6, which I will just read here as well. Tatra sattvam nirmaladvat prakashakam manamayam sukha sangena vadnati jnana sangena chanaga. That the mode of goodness, because it is purer than the other modes, is illuminating and frees one, very important, is both illuminating and frees one from sinful reactions. The other two modes of material nature don't produce that effect, rather the opposite. Sinful activities increase when one is in the mode of passion and when one is in the mode of ignorance. Therefore, the whole Vedic culture, the whole system of varna and ashrama, the whole purpose of dharma. Krishna descends in the material world to teach us about dharma. And there are two levels of dharma. Here we are dealing actually in this chapter, we're dealing with these two levels of dharma as well. One is the material dharma. Material dharma, whereby being here in the material world, we are conditioned by these modes. It is inevitable. This is stated also in this chapter, that all living entities, I impregnate this mahatattva, this material world, with living entities who, by coming in contact with the prakriti, material nature, become conditioned by these modes of material nature. And this chapter actually deals with practically all of the 5 tattvas. Also, as mentioned earlier, Bhagavad Gita is giving us a very wonderful, very simple, but very clear understanding of tattva, beginning with Ishvara. And of course, these are further elaborated in other sections of the Bhagavad Gita, and then further, even beyond, in such literatures as the Srimad Bhagavatam or Bhagavat Purana. We are therefore, by hearing the description of these different modes of nature, naturally our goal should be to become situated in the mode of goodness, because the mode of goodness, it is illuminating, it is freeing one from all sinful reactions, and one can develop knowledge. One can develop knowledge. One can develop peace of mind. This I will refer to a little later. Some very striking, most important verses from the Srimad Bhagavatam that also deal with the modes of material nature and how there is a specific process which is naturally linked with the same instruction Lord Krishna is giving here in terms of bhakti or devotion. And in the science of devotion, especially in the Guru Parampara, in our Vaishnava Guru Parampara, our foremost of acharyas who have been deputed by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu 500 years ago have very wonderfully, very elaborately, in great detail, given us this science of devotion or science of bhakti, which is in many ways hidden in various Vedic literatures, but especially prominently displayed in the pages of the Bhagavatam, and which is, of course, the main message of the entire Bhagavad Geeta and the main message of this chapter as well. So therefore, we'll just continue on with a few verses. Another benefit of becoming situated and remaining situated in the mode of goodness is mentioned in text number 11. Sarva dvadeshu dehesmin prakasha upajayate jnanam yada tada vidyad vivridham sattvam ityuta. The manifestations of the mode of goodness can be experienced when all the gates of the body are illuminated by knowledge. Actually, those who rise to the mode of goodness, those who maintain themselves in the mode of goodness, it will be manifest in the bodily symptoms themselves. The body is described as we are all living in what the Bhagavatam describes as the city of 9 gates. 9 gates or 9 holes within the body, and those who are actually living by the cultivation of knowledge in the mode of goodness, then these 9 gates of the body become, we could say, illuminated. Yes. And this is summarized, some of the benefits again, in the 16th verse of this chapter, where Krishna explains what happens when we are acting in the mode of goodness. Karmana sukritasyahu sattvikam nirmalam phalam rajasastu phalam dukkham agyanam tamasa phalam. By acting in the mode of goodness, one becomes purified. Work done in the mode of passion results in distress, and actions performed in the mode of ignorance result in foolishness. So this was also nicely brought out by our Achitananda Prabhu, how the very wonderfully explained, actually, especially in our Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, what is referred to as Sambandha, Abhidaya, and Prayojana Dhyan. This is being nicely presented, actually, in the pages of this 14th chapter. And all of the various symptoms, actually from verse 9 to 18. Basically, Lord Krishna is describing, elaborating in great detail what is the influence and what are the effects of these modes of material nature. One of those, yes. So without going into great detail, I would like to take us to verse number 19, which, yes. What will be, verse 19 and 20 in particular are very nicely explaining what will be the effect or the result for those who are able to come to this platform of the mode of goodness. Nanyam gunebhya kartaram yada drasta nupashyati gudebhyascha param vetti madbhavam sodigachyati. Krishna is speaking, when you see that there is nothing beyond these modes of nature in all activities, and that the Supreme Lord is transcendental to all these modes, then you can know my spiritual nature. So by the Krishna throughout the Bhagavad Gita, of course, is giving higher and higher, more and more confidential knowledge to Arjuna. And in this verse, explaining that as long as we remain conditioned or entangled by these modes of material nature, we cannot attain this higher nature, which is actually our original nature. Our original nature is very much the same as Krishna, as we mentioned a little earlier. And verse 20 is very much continuing this same message that Lord Krishna is giving. Guna netan atityatrin dehi deha samudbhavam janma mrichu jara dukkair vimukto mritam ashnute. When the embodied being is able to transcend these three modes, he can become free from birth, death, old age, and their distresses, and can enjoy nectar even in this life. Very important instruction, of course. What are the results or the benefits for those who are cultivating the mode of goodness? And of course, in other words, the message, the whole Vedic culture is encouraging us, helping us in so many different ways to gradually rise from the lower modes of nature and to at least become situated in the mode of goodness. But then the last instructions in this chapter, as given by Lord Krishna, is that one needs to go even beyond the mode of goodness. And this is, of course, the very well-known and famous verse, text number 26. Mam tayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samitityaitan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. One who engages in full devotional service, who does not fall in any circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature, and thus comes to the level of Brahman. Actually, it is important to make a link or a connection. Bhagavad Gita, as we know, is described by our acharyas as the ABC, or the preliminary knowledge of transcendental knowledge. And other literatures, especially like the Srimad Bhagavatam, are further elaborating on the same topic. There are a series of verses that I would like to share in this connection, which are directly connected with these modes of material nature. These particular 5 verses, we will see immediately the connection here in this 14th chapter, were especially quoted by Srila Prabhupada in going to the Western countries. Actually, Vedic culture, automatically, those who are fortunate to be born in India, because it is also described in the various Vedic literatures that one who is fortunate to take birth in the land of Bharatvarsha, then he has the greatest opportunity. This was nicely shared actually by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Bharat bhumite hoila manusya janamazar janma saltak kori kora para upakar. And therefore, when Srila Prabhupada went to the Western countries, he understood that he's going to a place where Vedic culture is practically non-existent. And therefore, he chose 5 very special verses, again, that are connected with these modes of material nature, and that I would like to share with you. There's a few other connections I'd like to make in the remaining portion of this presentation, and I'll just outline them very briefly here. And one of them has to do with the whole philosophy or concept of Varnashrama Dharma, and how these modes of material nature are connected with the concept of Varnashrama Dharma. And a few other points I'll mention in a few minutes. The series of verses are very profound in their meaning, and they are taken from the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter number 2, which is entitled Divinity and Divine Service. Dharma means actually that we have 2 natures. Again, in this chapter, Krishna speaks about Deha and Dehi. Deha is this material body, this material tabernacle that we have. But within this body is the Dehi. And of course, this is going back to one of the very first instructions given by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. Dehi nosmin yata dehe komaram jovanam jara tata dehantaras paptir dhirastatra namuyati. A very fundamental instruction and very fundamental knowledge, which is of absolute necessity for us to become successful in dealing with the world in which we are living. So in this second canto, this is text number 17, which is well known by those who are familiar with the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srinvatam swakatha Krishna punya sravana kirtana rijantasto yabhadrani vidunoti surit satam. And I read the translation. Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma, super soul in everyone's heart and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. Of course, the whole Bhagavad Gita, in the Western countries, we know the Bhagavad Gita as the song of the Lord. And simply by hearing this message of the Bhagavad Gita, which should be heard on a regular basis, on a daily basis, this is the effect that will happen. The impurities within the heart and the influences of these modes of material nature will become cleansed. And as we become more and more purified, we will rise above these modes of material nature. And therefore, this second of 5 texts that I'm sharing with the audience here, most important. We recite this verse actually every day. This was taught to us by our founder, Acharya, Srila Prabhupada. Nasta prayesha badrishu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati utamasloke bhaktir bhavati naistiki. Translation: by regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam, or by regularly hearing the message of the Bhagavatam, the message of the Bhagavad Gita, and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. So this verse 18, directly connected with the previous verse we have read, whereby when we make, whole Vedic culture is facilitating, encouraging, assisting in so many ways. It is part of the culture, an integral part of the culture, that on a daily basis we hear something from Shastra, whether it is Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, for this very purpose. The whole of Bhagavad Gita is the transcendental sound vibration of Lord Krishna, giving us transcendental knowledge. We come to text number 19, which is directly connected with our 14th chapter here, very nicely explaining what happens. Tada rajastamo bhava kama lobha dayaschaye cheta etairana vridam stitam sattve prasidati. Translation: as soon as irrevocable loving service is established in the heart, the effects of nature's modes of passion and ignorance, such as lust, desire, and hankering, disappear from the heart. Then the devotee is established in goodness, and he becomes completely happy. As we read these particular verses, very similar to the Bhagavad Gita, it is very logical. It is very scientific as well. That simply by following this process, we will get the results which are being described here. Now I come to the 4th verse. These 5 verses are like jewels in themselves in terms of the teachings that they are giving us in the context of these modes of material nature. So if we do this, if we hear on a daily basis the messages, Katha Krishna, in relation to Krishna, in relation to devotion, devotional service, bhakti, then we come to this level, as we rise above these modes of material nature, evam prasana manaso bhagavat bhakti jogataha bhagavat tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate. Thus established in the mode of unalloyed goodness. There is goodness, but there is something above goodness, which is called pure goodness, Suddha Sattva, or unalloyed goodness. So the translation, thus established in the mode of unalloyed goodness, the man whose mind has been enlivened by contact with devotional service to the Lord gains positive scientific knowledge of the personality of Godhead and the stage of liberation from all material association. These modes of material nature are binding us, are heavily binding us to all kinds of material association. But we, who are the spirit soul within this material body, have actually nothing to do with this material existence. Our nature is different. Our nature is of the level of transcendence. And the last instruction, or the last verse, which is text number 21, what is the end result? By following this process, vidyate hridaya grantish chidyante sarva samshayah kriyante chasya karmani drista evat manishvare. Something very important. Translation. Thus, the knot in the heart is pierced, and all misgivings are cut to pieces. The chain of fruitive actions is terminated when one sees the self as master. Self as master means up until the point that we are under the modes of material nature, Shastra describes our situation as Godasa, servants of the senses. We have a choice either to remain Godas, for which we simply continue further and further our entanglement in the material world, or we can become master of the senses, master of our mind, by becoming Goswami, from Godasa to Goswami. I just wanted to make this connection with the Bhagavatam, because the Bhagavatam actually contains all of the important instructions that are there, of course, in the Bhagavad Gita. I'd like to make a few other connections here. And one is with a very interesting essay that was written by our founder Acharya's Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada many years ago, before going to the Western countries, called Geeta Nagari. Geeta Nagari. That place where the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita are not only spoken, but where the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita are lived. And in that essay, which appeared actually in 1956, in Srila Prabhupada's Back to Godhead magazine, he describes how in our Geeta Nagari, the main personality, actually, who will be worshipped by all the residents of Geeta Nagari, will be Parthasarathi, naturally. The Supreme Lord, who is the, who has taken the very humble position of being the chariot driver of Arjuna. One of our temples in India, of course, in Delhi, we have the deity of Sri Radha Parthasarathi. So, in other words, whole Vedic culture is facilitating that in a more simplified atmosphere of village life. Geeta Nagari actually means especially a village where people are having that understanding that the primary goal of life is to develop or cultivate this knowledge, as was mentioned a little earlier. That the great sages in the beginning of this chapter, all the great sages, by cultivating this knowledge, have attained this param siddhim, the supreme perfection. So therefore, we should understand by this, simply by observing. It is very easy to observe all over the world, the vast majority of people. This was Srila Prabhupada's observation in going to New York City. I'm not singling out any particular city, but it just so happened to be where Srila Prabhupada went. And he was pointing out how such cities as New York or other cities where the primary activities are especially influenced by rajas and tamas, where there is heavy competition, where everyone is engaged in fruitive activities, where majority of people are simply after material pursuit, so-called economic development. Such a situation is where we see, in particular, all kinds of sinful activities, because there's no proper understanding, there's no cultivation of what is meant to be the higher goal or purpose of life. So in our chapter today, Param Bhuya Pravakshyami, Param Bhuya Pravakshyami, I shall now speak to you, Arjuna, this supreme transcendental knowledge, Jnanam Jnanam Uttamam, of all knowledge, the topmost knowledge. So Vedic culture is inviting all of us to live, to have as our primary goal and objective the cultivation of this knowledge, which of course, the beginning of which is found in the pages of the Bhagavad Gita. I wanted to connect also something which I thought initially, should I connect this, because it seems like it's remote. In one sense it is, in one sense it is not. This very important verse, which is of course connected with this chapter also, Namo Brahmanya Devaya Go Brahmana Hitaya Cha Jagat Hitaya Krishnaya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Very important verse whereby, again, this exemplifies the nature of the Vedic culture, gives primary importance to Go Brahmana. It is nice to explain that actually Go Brahmana belong, Go means cows, Brahmana, sages, those who are cultivating transcendental knowledge, the teachers within society, Go Brahmana. Cows and Brahmanas, it is nicely explained, belong to the same family. Why do they belong to the same family? Because both are in the mode of goodness. By nature, within the system of Varna and Asrama, the Brahmanas, by cultivating this knowledge, by the cultivation, regular, daily cultivation of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, etc., naturally, they become situated, more and more firmly situated, anchored in the mode of goodness. And mode of goodness is also nicely described in the Bhagavatam as having 4 characteristics. One who attains actually the mode of goodness must demonstrate these 4 qualities of sattvam, truthfulness, doya, compassion, tapa, austerity or discipline, and saucham, satyam, doya, tapa, saucham. These are actually nicely described as the basis of dharma. Mode of goodness means manifesting these four very much desired qualities. Those in the mode of goodness will develop these qualities, will demonstrate these qualities. They will be peaceful in mind. And this verse we were reading, also very important, by the cultivation of transcendental knowledge. This fourth verse we were reading, Evam prasanamanaso, Bhagavad Bhakti Yogata. Actually, the verse is nicely explaining how it is only when we develop the mode of goodness, only when we come to the mode of goodness and maintain ourselves in the mode of goodness, we can then nicely engage in Bhagavat or activities of bhakti. Evam prasamana manaso Bhagavat Bhakti Yogata, Bhagavat Bhakti, which is, of course, the conclusion which is given in this chapter as well, a verse we will read in a few minutes. And what happens, this is also very important, Bhagavat Bhakti Yogata, when nicely performed, will take us to Bhagavat Tattva Vijnanam. Bhagavat Tattva Vijnanam means that the Supreme Lord within the heart of all living entities will actually reveal himself, will actually give us transcendental knowledge, will enable us to access transcendental knowledge which is actually there. Because by nature, living entity is, as we mentioned earlier, situated in Satchit Ananda Vigraha. So I'd like to come to this end of the chapter after making these brief connections, but I believe very important in terms of Geeta Nagari, Vedic culture. We can understand that modern society, through increased urbanization based on these two lower modes of material nature, unfortunately. Urbanization, modernization, mechanization is largely based or connected with the mode of passion and mode of ignorance. And therefore we can see naturally all kinds of negative results that are taking place. We are finding ourselves in most precarious condition all over the world. We are destroying nature, we are destroying our health, we're destroying the whole planet because of not cultivating or not knowing about this knowledge. So therefore the importance to introduce this knowledge, not only in terms of speaking about this knowledge, but also in terms of demonstrating. And this is what, of course, Arjuna was asking at the end of the chapter. What are the symptoms? What are the symptoms of an individual? We can ask in a similar way, what are the symptoms of a society? What are the symptoms of a community where these principles are being followed? Where individuals are endeavoring, at least endeavoring, to come to the mode of goodness, are endeavoring to maintain themselves in the mode of goodness, are endeavoring to go even beyond the mode of goodness. So this was also talked about earlier about the various tattvas. So let us I'll just come to the very end right now, which is most important verse as quoted by Srila Prabhupada. This text 26, one who engages in full devotional service and who does not fall down in any circumstance at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. And this last verse, Brahmano hi pratistaham amritasya vyayasya cha shasvatasya chadharmasya sukha yaikantikasya cha. Dharma, the word dharma, comes up, of course, again and again. Translation, and I am the basis of the impersonal Brahman, which is the constitutional position of ultimate happiness, and which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal. However, yes, we come to that level of Brahman when we study, especially the Srimad Bhagavatam, we come to understand, of course, it's already explained in the Bhagavad Gita as well, that there are different levels of transcendental realization. One of the important verses, and possibly I can come to the end of my presentation today by quoting this particular verse, which is most important from the same chapter, actually, of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Divinity and Divine Service. Vedanti tat tattvavidas tattvam yajnanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavan iti sabjate. And the translation as follows: learned transcendentalists who know the absolute truth call this non-dual substance Brahman, first level, Paramatma, second level, and Bhagavan, third level, which is describing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Just to summarize briefly, we should know from this chapter in particular that any connection or involvement with the modes of material nature, especially the lower modes of nature, mode of passion and mode of ignorance, will simply keep us entangled and therefore naturally unhappy, distressful in this material world. Therefore, the goal is to endeavor to rise to the mode of goodness, which is, as was described earlier, illuminating, brings one, helps one develop a sense of happiness, and where one can develop knowledge. But beyond the mode of goodness, one should endeavor to come to the mode of pure goodness, beyond, completely beyond the modes of material nature, and that is the level of bhakti. And therefore we find in our Vaishnava literatures one very important book, Bhakti Rasa Amrita Sindhu. Bhakti Rasa Amrita Sindhu, the nectar of devotion. If we want to actually experience real transcendental happiness, as also nicely explained in the Bhagavatam, that is the topmost dharma. Savai pumsam paro dharmo jato bhakti radhoksaje ahaituki pratihata yagatma suprasidati. All of the necessities of life, both material and spiritual, will be met very easily when one engages in one's param dharma. The param dharma is bhakti. It is also nicely explained how, again, by this process of bhakti, Vasudeve Bhagavati, Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha, Janayati Asu Vairagyam Gyanam Sayad Ahaitukam. Both, we don't have to endeavor separately to cultivate knowledge. By this wonderful process of bhakti devotion to Lord Krishna, to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Bhagavan Uvacha, then ahaituki, automatically, spontaneously, these two results will come. Vairagya, detachment from this material world, detachment from these modes of material nature, and then jnanam, transcendental knowledge. I would therefore like to bring this to a close. Bhagavad Gita remains, for me, as all of you, most important book which we need to present to the world as not simply a book belonging to a particular sectarian practice. It is a book of knowledge, universal book of knowledge that every leader, every teacher in the world should be reading and should be teaching on a daily basis. Once again, I am very, very thankful to Dr. Gajendra Panda and his team to organize this event. Has required tremendous effort, but I'm sure it is bringing and will bring immense benefits to whoever hears, and the simple sound vibration that is being sung every day by the recitation of these different chapters of the Bhagavad Gita will definitely bring immense auspiciousness to everyone in the world, which is very much needed today. Thank you again very much for your kind attention. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada ki.
हरे कृष्ण धन्यवादाः प्रणामाः पूज्य भक्ति राघव स्वामी पादानाम् इदम् अद्भुतं प्रवचनम् अमृतारसायनम् वयम् एकघण्टापर्यन्तम् अतीव आनन्देन प्राप्तवन्तः वयम् अतीव उत्फुल्लिताः स्मः न केवलं गीतायाः तत्त्वम् अपि तु भागवतस्य सारम् अपि अस्माकं समक्षम् अतीव अनुग्रहं कृत्वा दत्तवन्तः भवतां चरणकमलेषु वयं प्रणाम परम्परां निवेदयामः अभिनन्दनं कुर्मः अपि च साधुवादं निवेदयामः